Guys, we just had one of the best Saturdays of the year. I can't wait till the next Saturday. That's why the podcast is called Until Saturday. I'm Ari Wasserman, joined by David Ubman and a special guest, Antonio Morales, our USC beat writer, who sat down with Lincoln Riley last week and had a very good Q&A about all things USC and where that program is and headed. And I read it. Antonio, I want to tell you before we get into the show and we become enemies that I thought you did a very good job of asking the questions that needed to be asked in a very pointed, mature, and efficient way. So good job. We're going to talk more about that at the end of the show. If you haven't read that yet, I encourage you to do so on The Athletic. Wanted to welcome everybody officially to the Sunday Sound Off show. We will be hitting on the coaching carousel news. We'll answer a question about Michigan's win over Ohio State. We're going to try to explain how rivalries work to Dave. We're going to get to a bunch of callers and what they have to say. We're getting more and more calls every week. It's really, really hard to get to all of them. Don't be discouraged. We will certainly see a pattern if we don't choose you and try our best to get you onto the show. The support for the show has been incredible, and we certainly appreciate the momentum we have. If you want to be a part of the Sunday Sound Off show in the future, please call 316-462-9852 to leave a voicemail. 316-462-9852 again, if you want to do so. You can also text that line, but we'll certainly air towards the voicemails because they're funny, they're entertaining, they're engaging, and of course it allows you guys to feel like a part of the show. Be sure to subscribe to The Athletic for $1 a month for 12 months right now during our Black Friday promotion. Visit theathletic.com/Saturday. The deal is good through Monday, November 27th. So do it quickly. And if you want to sign up, Antonio's Q&A with Lincoln Riley is a good place to start. Lastly, sign up for the Until Saturday newsletter where you get your daily fill of college football news right to your inbox from our deep and talented roster of college football reporters. Loads of carousel content by Jana Bardall and our staff. You do not have to be subscribed to The Athletic to get that newsletter, but I think that if you get it, you probably will shortly after. Always. Thank you so much for the people here who are listening to us live. If you're listening to us here on the show and you want to listen to the podcast, the link can be found in the podcast description, and you can sign up and subscribe, share, like, review, all the things that we can do. And if you're listening to this in audio form and you want to watch us live on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, that link is also in your show's description. If you like both of them, it's great. All the new episodes that come out in audio form, there's unique content on the YouTube channel. If you like the show, I encourage you to subscribe to both. Okay, we've got a lot of voicemails to get through. This is a big day, big Saturday. But first, Antonio, how are we doing today?
Doing good. And it was a bye week in the Morales household this week. USC wrapped up their season last week. So kind of a relaxing weekend just to watch college football, and obviously a lot of dramatic games on Saturday, a lot of crazy endings. So it was fun. It was a fun Saturday to have off and just sit at home and watch everything unfold.
Is USC going to play in a bowl game, or is the whole team opting out?
They're going to play in a bowl game. It just depends on if it's in El Paso, Las Vegas, LA, San Diego. Just a matter of.
Let's hope for El Paso. Dave, how are we doing?
Lincoln in a sombrero. I'm doing good, Ari. I've just been studying on the history of rivalries today, and if you didn't think I got it before, Ari, I definitely get rivalries now. I've just been reading about it, and I think that if you just read about rivalries, that's good. You don't need to experience anything like that. So I'm excited to talk about what we learned, Ari, and what rivalries in college football mean.
Just so everybody knows, I'm in a text strand with Ralph Russo and David Ubben, and they're both coming at me, and I don't even remember what the problem was. But I had to instruct David before the show that if he's talking about the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry and discussing anything Ohio State related, to not say they can't beat Michigan, but that's a good start. And then once we figure that part out, then maybe we can have a deep and exciting discussion about that. So, we do a little grab ass here at the beginning of our shows usually, but why don't we get right into the voicemails? We have so many. There's a lot to tackle. And if you're here and you want to hear about Mike Elko and Texas A&M and the coaching carousel and the craziness with Mark Stoops, we have voicemails that will naturally lead us to those discussions. We'll be covering all the pertinent news of the weekend. So why don't we go to the first voicemail and get this thing started?
Hey guys, Dave from Chicagoland here. Big Michigan State fan, super psyched for the Jonathan Smith hire. Seems like a really good fit by all accounts in East Lansing. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are. My biggest concern is just the recruiting in the Midwest. He's never done it before. Wondering how that'll go or how you guys think it'll go going forward in East Lansing. But overall, I think it's a great hire. Curious to get your guys' thoughts. Thanks. Bye.
Antonio, you cover the Pac-12. You've seen this build up close on the West Coast. What is your thought of Jonathan Smith and what he was able to do at Oregon State, and how do you think that fits with Michigan State?
I think it fits with Michigan State really well because that's the program that when it was at its best in the mid 2010s, it was finding these under the radar guys and developing them. And I think when I talked to some Pac-12 coaches back in February, they said that Oregon State develops or evaluates better than any other team in the league. They just constantly get the most out of what people perceive to be the least. And last year they won 10 games. They beat Oregon last year and gave USC all they could handle, and Washington too. And same this year, they almost beat Washington, and they won 8 games. So, considering what he walked into, and there's a really bad situation with Gary Anderson, and you saw the gradual build year in and year out. And then the recruiting started to get a little better towards the end. Aiden Childs, Kelsey Howard were some 4-star prospects that he got. And I don't remember the last time. I don't even think the first few years he signed a 4-star prospect. So it got a little better towards the end. I just think it's kind of fits what Michigan State thrives with, guys who kind of develop and evaluate well and make the most out of what they have.
Well, just for some context, Childs is the 6th highest rated player that Oregon State has ever landed in high school recruiting anyway. Steven Jackson, Derek Anderson, and some of the names that are more synonymous with Oregon State were ranked a little bit higher. But the thing that I wanted to ask you, Dave, and it's a very curious thought process because I feel like you have to like the job, because anybody who has proven that they can build a team going to a place that needs to be constructed, I always kind of err on the side of, yeah, I like that. The one thing that I don't know about and is strange to me is this conflict I'm having internally about it, and help me through it.
Okay.
Michigan State was at its best during the last 7 years in the height of the Mark D'Antonio era, when they were doing a better job of evaluating or out-evaluating other Big Ten teams. And they did it so well even that they were able to beat Ohio State in 2015 and what was probably the most talented team I'll ever cover. And they did so because they had a lot of guys from Ohio, and they developed them, and they put themselves in a position to be a very, very good football team. Then they hired Mel Tucker, and his whole plan was to elevate Michigan State's status in the entire sport by hosting and attacking more elite level recruits and recruiting. 5 stars. He had a lot of 5 stars coming onto campus, was not closing them, but he had them coming, which is a step in the right direction. So my thought process is here is, one, Jonathan Smith has done a very good job of building Oregon State on the West Coast, but you're looking at a recruiting class in 2024 that ranks currently 64th nationally as we get into the month of December. And his 2023 class, even with Childs, ranked number 49 in the composite. And I'm wondering to myself, is that, like, where does Michigan State have to be? Like, does Jonathan Smith put you right in the middle there of out-evaluate people, do a very good job, and compete for a Big Ten championship once every 4 or 5 years? Or are you concerned about the lack of recruiting results? And frankly speaking, Oregon State is what it is. I don't know that anybody's going to go out there and put up top 25 classes. It's not to say that he can't do it. I'm very curious what his recruiting outlook and strategy is going to be at Michigan State.
Yeah, I'm not really concerned about that. I think ultimately, like you said, if you're Oregon State and you're trying to recruit, I mean, where are you in the pecking order in the Pac-12? Like,
I think you're in the bottom 5 in the pecking order in Power 5 football.
Yeah, that's for sure. You don't have a ton of natural base. You can't just like pop down to California. You don't have Oregon's money or brand strength. You've got a lot of things working against you. Now you also have a lot of things working against you at Michigan State, but you're still, in a better spot. And I think that when it comes to the sort of key question from the listener of, what happens when you go from a place that you know very well, and quick aside, this is a very depressing move because, like, Oregon State is being left behind on the island of misfit toys, and Jonathan Smith is one of their favorite sons. And we don't see a lot of coaches coaching at their alma mater leaving. And that sucks. And that's a product of realignment. And if the Pac-12 still existed, I don't even think he takes Michigan State's call, quite frankly. But this is where we're at in the sport. So that's unfortunate, but that's where we are. And I don't think anybody blames him, but that's where it is. Anyway, as far as trying to recruit in an area that you're not familiar with, it's not that hard. You have to be genuine. You have to be who you are. You have to have a plan, and you have to be diligent. You got to be everywhere. You got to say, okay, here's where we're living. Our staff, we're going to divvy up Ohio in these specific regions. We're going to go heavy in Michigan in these specific regions. These guys are going to get to know here, and I'm going to be around. I'm going to get to meet all these coaches. I'm going to call them when they don't have players. When they do have players, they might see me a little bit more. You have to have a plan. You have to be organized. You have to be diligent, and you have to do what you say and say what you mean. And if you do all those things and you have some success on the field, you will see that success translate, even if you don't have ties to the area. It takes time to build relationships. Recruiting is all about relationships, but we've seen this a million times before, right? You know, we've seen coaches. I mean, Urban is probably the best example of never been in the SEC, and he comes down there. I think Matt Rule, a lot of people had a lot of questions about him when he went from Temple to Baylor. And he might be one of the most beloved college coaches in the state of Texas now. And he was there like 4 years. James Franklin coming to the state of Tennessee. And high school coaches in Tennessee still talk about him at Vanderbilt. They're like, I love that guy. And I think that's what you got to do. So I'm not that concerned.
Which is crazy because we did a coaching confidential in Pennsylvania, and there was a lot of people who didn't really like that guy.
This is true. Well, I think at some point, maybe you wear out your welcome in some ways. But my point is not so much it's about James Franklin, but it's more about that if you go somewhere and you show up in coaches' offices and they know you and you treat their kids well, you can do well in recruiting. And there's a lot of pitfalls in doing that. But if you are just who you are, you don't try to be something that you're not. Say what you're gonna say, do what you're gonna do, be that person, and be around. No names, although some of their names might rhyme with High and Barson. You got to be there, and if you are, you're gonna be okay.
I think that was a really nice little speech that you would do at like a coach's seminar. My question that I'm actually curious about, though, not to be disrespectful, it sounded way worse than I meant it to sound, is what's
coming in hot.
No, I didn't mean it. It
Is that
sounded
the
way
question?
worse than I wasn't coming at you like that on purpose. I know it sounded like I was. But
Is
what
the
is
question,
the
can he close?
strategy? No, what's the strategy? Do you go after those kids that Tucker was going after? Do you try to be a evaluation king in a time in which you have USC, Washington, Oregon, and UCLA coming to your conference? Like,
you can't chase every 5-star in California and Georgia and Pennsylvania and Arizona. You can't do all that.
You guys remember how much crap I took on this podcast saying that Mel Tucker couldn't do that 2 years ago? And now we're on the show and it's all come back full circle to the point where it's like you can't.
I was not involved in those discussions.
Yeah, I wasn't either. I agreed with you.
Let the record show I was not involved.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just like people.
You can't do that.
I think that was one of the top 5 most angry people were at me in show history. And I'm not saying that I think it was impossible. He was making, it was like,
you have a finite resource in recruiting, and that is time. And this is why coaches hate losing recruiting battles, because you invest a ton of time in a guy. And if you get down to the finish line and you can't close, you could have invested that time somewhere else in somebody that you got. Okay. So you can't be running around and shooting your shot all over the place. But if there's 5 stars in Ohio or somebody that you have that has a tie to your school, absolutely you got to do that. You got to do that. And then you also have to find the guys that, maybe you're getting sniffed around from the MAC, trust your evaluation and say, hey, this kid can do something for us. And do that.
Antonio, we also have to acknowledge that he did a pretty good job in the portal there. We also have to acknowledge that Michigan State's probably a pretty attractive portal destination where you're a team that's at least recognizable to a lot of players going through the recruiting process and, has made the college football playoff and is in a very competitive and attractive conference. He could probably do some damage that way, I would assume.
Yeah, Mel Tucker, that's how he had success in 2021. Jonathan Smith did a good job with it, landing DJU last year to Oregon State. So we've seen him have a good run with it. And like I said, he evaluates well and does well with culture and fit. So I think he's going to fit in well there. And I'm curious to see, like you said, how the recruiting plan sorts itself out. But I trust him. I think he probably believes the recruiting ceiling is higher, which is why he left. I'm curious to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah. Okay. So we have some other coaches on the move here, and I don't know how much time we have, but Texas A&M, it says here in the graphic that Texas A&M is targeting Mike Elko as the next head coach. I believe that is happening now. Last night
we don't have the graphic, but we
don't have the official
Texas A&M announcement
tweet.
It's happening,
but it does seem like it's happening. And he is a former assistant at A&M who was around and helped A&M put together one of the greatest recruiting classes in the history of recruiting. And then he went to another place that probably has, top or bottom 10 resources or, most challenges in recruiting and turned them around very quickly. I thought that this was the exact type of hire that A&M needed to make and should make. And, it wasn't flash, it wasn't flair, it wasn't crazy, it wasn't a bunch of money being thrown around and trying to, win the day. It just seems like a functional, appropriate, and may I say, non-insane hire for a coaching search that went off the walls past midnight on Saturday night with Mark Stoops is coming, then he's going, and there was he was the head coach for 3 hours, and then it didn't happen. I think that it might have worked out that A&M just did what they did the right thing, even if it wasn't flashy.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you have somebody who obviously you have the recruiting piece. At Duke, you had a pretty salty defense, a really dynamic offense. If you're looking for negatives from this hire, it's pretty much just experience. But you got to like what he's done at Duke. Winning at levels that, like you said, Ari, is really hard to do. Now, I think the challenge of turning Duke into a consistent winner and trying to build A&M up to a 10-win, 11-win, 12-win, 13, 14-win team, maybe, is a different kind of challenge. And that poses some questions. But when I look at Mike Elko taking over at A&M, we've talked about this, Ari. We both agree it's a top 5 job in the sport. If you're looking for reasons to believe that he can't win big at A&M, I think you're going to be looking for a while. It's not the sexiest hire you're ever going to see, but you have somebody that wants to be at A&M, that understands A&M. That's, like Dabo's the best example. A&M's a weird place. Sorry. It just is. Like, I think that they embrace their weird. It's a very unique, and I use that term very liberally, place. And I think some people, when they aren't familiar with it, it can be a little off-putting. Okay, A&M is what A&M is. Elko knows that stuff. He's familiar with it. He's not going to be confused if somebody says "good bull" at him. So
that's good bull.
Thank you. And ultimately, I think that really does matter. So it's a good hire. It's not going to get anybody excited or be talking about, A&M's going to win a national championship next year, but he's a competent coach that understands how to win in the new era of college football, and you have the backing of a lot of money for everything that you could possibly need there. So
does it concern you? Well, let me Antonio and I like to argue with each other a lot, but let's do it. He rolled his eyes at us at the beginning of the show before we started recording at the notion that A&M is not a top 5 job in America. And I'd love to know.
No, I asked if the shenanigans that went on last night is a strike against your argument that this is a top 5 job.
Do you feel like a fan revolt having any impact on the people in power's decision is unhealthy?
I do. I do think it's unhealthy. So, do you guys think there's a major difference between like Mark Stoops and Mike Elko?
I don't.
I think Mark Stoops is a lot more proven. I think that some of the revolt around that was a little disrespectful for Mark Stoops, who I think you can make a really compelling case as the 3rd best coach in the SEC. But I think like the results, I don't think would be markedly different. I think it's a different kind of challenge. I think sustaining wins at Kentucky and building a decent program into a champion are two very, very different tasks. I think they both would be capable of doing it. I don't have that big of a problem. I get why people are frustrated with Mark Stoops. I think the idea was like, well, he's never won big. And I think people don't understand how hard that is to do at Kentucky. And so like, I get like, I think casual fans, especially A&M fans, clearly they don't understand how
it would have been
Coach Mark
really
Stoops is.
fun to see Mark Stoops with players.
It is. It's like a Bill
Stoops
Snyder question.
Yeah. And I also thought that was a reasonable hire that makes a lot of sense from both aspects of it. So I don't really think like they went from Mark Stoops to, Drake. Like, I think they wanted to get like the epitome of the sport and prove that A&M is a top 5 job in America. And it's like the one thing that I think that you could probably say for Elko is that he's had a front row seat on how to assemble one of the greatest classes in the history of the sport at the place he's going to, which I think puts you in a position to maybe be more equipped to understand the expectation and what it takes to actually do that, which, is probably a pretty big deal. That said, I don't know if like you said, building up Duke in a short amount of time or building up Kentucky is the same job as trying to win a national championship and beat Alabama.
We had a comment that said Stoops is older and his ceiling is known. No. Stoops is older and Kentucky's ceiling is known. I don't think we know what Mark Stoops' ceiling is, and I think we would have found out at A&M. Ultimately, it is what it is. Like, I think he'll be happy at Kentucky. It's a great job. He'll be fine. I just found the revolts a little disrespectful.
Also, too, let's also acknowledge the fact that Mark Stoops has one of the best jobs in America too, from like a coaching standpoint. Like he is getting paid quite a bit of money and has a huge buyout, and really is only expected to win 7 or 6 games a year to keep his job. And if he wins 9, he's the Bear Bryant of that place. So like that
is that above or below A&M in the top 5?
No, I said top 10 in terms of coach experience. I think A&M's a top 5 job in totality based on what they can pay you, what the last buyout was, where it's located on the map, the resources you have in NIL, the desperation of administration and fans to actually win. I think you can go there and do things that you cannot do at most other places. Everything that you need to win a national championship is in place at A&M. And I don't know that is the case for more than 12 jobs total. And then once you go from that, then you whittle it down from those 12 jobs. And at A&M, if you get fired, your grandchildren's grandchildren can drive a Rolls Royce to public school or to private school in 2137, and it'll be fine because you have so much money. So
I think the best way we've mentioned on the show before, but Antonio, the best way to describe it is if A&M in the next 5 years became the next Georgia, won back-to-back national championships and did all this stuff, nobody would be looking around going, how are they doing this? People would be saying, yeah, about time. You have incredible facilities.
Or they finally got somebody who can do it. I told the story on Twitter because somebody asked me, he goes, if you think it's a top 5 job, would you invest into that stock with your own money right now? And I said, I had a story, and I don't know if this is too inside baseball of my life, but when my neighbor and closest friend when I was a kid, his father owned a computer store called Apple or Computer Town. And this store sold Macs before the creation of the iPod. And this store went belly up because Mac wasn't cool yet. Do you guys remember what Apple was like before Apple was cool?
A little bit.
Then 6 months after the store closed, I believe Apple came out with the iPod, and then it became what it is today. That was the thing that made it trendy. It got people into the stores. It got people buying iMacs and MacBook Pros. And now Apple, I think, is one of the best, if not the best company in the entire world. And it's like, I felt really bad even as a kid knowing what happened there, but also now thinking about A&M as Apple, I feel like A&M is pre-iPod Apple. And if they get Steve Jobs, who knows how to work the place, then they could be Apple one day. And that doesn't mean that they'll get Steve Jobs or that even exists. It's really hard to find Steve Jobs, but if you find Steve Jobs, you have a corporation that has the ability and the wherewithal to take over the world. So I would not invest in Apple in 1999. I wouldn't invest in Apple in 2001. People who did are very, very rich and will never have to work again. But I certainly would have invested and have invested a large portion of my paychecks every month into Apple now. It changes. It's not the same thing. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but why don't we does that make sense? Am I nuts? Antonio, you're like smirking at me. I never know if you're like, this guy's an idiot, or if I changed your mind at all.
No, you haven't. I'll just look at 100 years of data and then I'll let that support myself.
All right.
I'm going to lose my mind because it's not okay. If you don't get it by now, then there's no hope for you.
Ari, did you know that? Did you know that Steve Sarkisian's? Did you know Steve Sarkisian's never won 10 games either?
Steve Jobs and Apple. That was not the best. We lost you there, bud. Are you good?
I'm good. We're good.
What were you saying that you were laughing about? We didn't hear you.
I said, did you know that Steve Sarkisian's never won 10 games before?
Yeah, that's right. It's the same thing. And it's the same bullcrap that I got from Antonio before the year started. Are you going to, Antonio's Ari doesn't know anything. Texas has never won anything. Steve Sarkisian's never done anything. You got the floor here, pal.
I was wrong. You were right. You called it.
It's funny, though, because Texas is still probably not going to make the playoff. Okay. Let's just hit on Jeff Lebby to Mississippi State. I know this is kind of strange. You know a lot about Oklahoma, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't people want to fire him 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, they did.
Okay. All right.
They did. It's almost like, it's almost like sometimes the masses, the fan bases of some programs see the world differently, perhaps more jadedly, perhaps more reactionary than people who make decisions. I know that's crazy, Ari. I suspect we might revisit this conversation when we talk about the rivalry, but, Jeff Lebby has a pretty long history of pretty good offense. I think there's a fair question for why Kendall Briles and Jeff Lebby have gotten a lot of jobs and Art Briles is still a pariah in the sport. That question is for people who have hired them. A long time ago, well, not that long ago, it's probably 2016, I had Major Applewhite on my podcast when he hired Kendall the first time after the Baylor stuff and pressed him pretty hard on why are you doing this? Why do you feel like this is something that you want to do? What did the vetting process look like? And in short, he was kind of like, when people say things happen, you look into it. Sometimes they don't necessarily reality. If what you find out is not necessarily, what the real situation is. Listen, I'm not involved in these vetting conversations, but I do think that's an interesting question to ask. And there's a lot of places that don't really care about that or want to shrug it off. And in the vetting process, a lot of times, the victims of these situations at Baylor are never quite asked about their experiences, and it is what it is. So,
Antonio, do you have any thoughts on this one? Being somebody who used to live in Mississippi and cover these teams?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how the dynamic between him and Lane Kiffin is, because now they're, he was on Lane Kiffin's staff just 2 years ago. He was the play caller, and Lane kind of threw him under the bus on the way out for the play calling and that Sugar Bowl loss to Baylor. So it didn't seem like it ended on the greatest of terms over there. And I was there when it was Leach, when it was Mullen and Freeze, and they took the rivalry to lows in terms of how toxic it was. They had boosters at Ole Miss suing players at Mississippi State, and it was pretty wild. And Dan Mullen created this whole NCAA investigation type stuff. So I wonder if it'll still be as sanctimonious as it has been in the past couple of years with Lebby and Kiffin. And I'm interested to see how he does on the recruiting trail, being an offensive guy at a school that's built on defensive linemen, and that's what they're thriving. So I want to see if he can still keep getting those guys over there in Starkville.
It is interesting that he is the first coach from the Briles staff that was all fired essentially at Baylor to get a head coaching job. And I think we have a commenter that said, I think some people just don't care about the things that happen in Baylor. I think that's true. I think there's a lot of people that just don't care. So, like, it is what it is. Like you can like these people, like these guys have been in the sport for a long time, and a lot of them have been hired to other jobs, and you can say what you want, but like I'm not in charge of hiring these guys, so I cannot like it, but that is what it is.
Dana Holgerson is out at Houston. Who else? Am I forgetting anyone?
Well, I mean, there's some smaller jobs for sure.
Well, the good news is, guys, is that we are going to have Tom Allen is out at Indiana. Pretty big buyout for that job. It's kind of funny to think about, but we're going to have a bunch of coaching carousel coverage this week. Our techspert Sam Kahn and one of the best national college football reporters in the country, Max Olson, on Tuesday's pod are really going to get deep into these discussions. It was nice to have a preliminary discussion about it. We'll get much deeper on the Until Saturday feed this week. Why don't we go to the next voicemail and see if we can teach Dave a thing or two about how college football works.
Andy from Detroit. My voice is a little hoarse for being in the big house yesterday. I want to say that was maybe the most important win I've ever seen in my life. If you add all the stakes, all the crap surrounding the last 6 weeks, the change in the landscape of college football at large, and the stain it would put on our last 3 years, you have to say that this is one of the biggest wins that you've seen any program make in our lifetimes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Bye.
When you think about the direction that Michigan's program could have been headed with a loss, like the 40 yards that separated the thin line between winning and losing, and what that would have meant for the program, what it would have meant for Jim Harbaugh, what it would have meant for the Spygate narrative, I think that you can make the case that this was the biggest regular season win of the last decade. I felt like I was watching five storylines all unfolding in front of our eyes all at once. Now, I am very interested to see how Michigan's scandal is going to be viewed by the general public now that they won a game after this all came out without it against a pretty good Ohio State team. And that is going to be an interesting thing to see unfold. But I certainly think a program win that probably takes the cake for me. I don't know if I'm forgetting one.
I was thinking about this. The Blue Bloods, their legacy and their perception is so cemented that it's hard to have one game really affect that. But Michigan, because of this sort of unprecedented sign-stealing advantage, was in that weird spot where they were. The whole Harbaugh era, the rise post 2020 season was under question. And so I agree with you. I think regular season, you're right. In terms of biggest wins, like that shaped more than just that team or that
shaped
season.
Programs, shaped conferences, shaped other.
I think for me, the two that came to mind were Boise over Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl, and TCU over Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl. I think those are the two that jumped out to me. TCU probably doesn't get in the Big 12 without that win. That changed how people viewed them. And Boise, even now, they haven't really been what they were under Chris Peterson, and certainly in other times as well. But their brand still resonates, and it all started with that Fiesta Bowl win over Adrian Peterson.
Antonio, does any USC have any big wins in the last 10 years that I can remember?
I think Oregon.
What about else? What about other teams?
Oregon, I think, though they won the Fiesta Bowl like in 2001, like they kicked the crap out of like Pete Carroll's USC team, his last one in 2009. That was Chip Kelly's first year as a head coach, and I think that kind of showed everybody kind of what was coming, where the power was going to transition from USC to Oregon, and they went to the Rose Bowl. They won the conference that year, and I think they won the conference like 3 straight years and played the national title game the next year. So that's one on the West Coast that stands out a bit.
Yeah, the 3 wins in a row in the rivalry. Undefeated, number 1 versus number 2, Ohio State. Jim Harbaugh's not on the sideline. The Spygate scandal, a berth in the Big Ten championship game, college football playoff berth alive. making the college football playoff during a time in which it's probably the fastest and maybe less. I mean, Georgia still exists, but if they're going to win a national championship, this is a year you do it. When you add up all of that, not to mention that it delegitimizes certain aspects of the Spygate scandal in terms of whether or not you look your nose down at what they built there as just a result of cheating alone.
Absolutely.
I think that all these things added up in the accumulation of all those talking points, I think undeniably makes this the biggest regular season win I can remember in my adulthood. I don't know if I'm forgetting anything, but
no, I think the only one in recent history that jumped out to me was Cincinnati over Notre Dame, because we haven't had a program that won as many games as Michigan had that had to answer for its perception. That's not a thing that has to happen. When you have a Power 5 team that wins, 30 games is whatever they have in the last 3 years, people just sort of accept that as like, oh, they're on a really nice run. Nobody is like, oh, but like it's fraudulent for whatever. 3 years is a long time to be playing winning football. But because of all that stuff, I think that they're in such a weird spot that like that's why pretty much only the smaller teams jumped out to me, because a lot of people do question how good those teams really are. And the big schools don't really ever have to have that. But when you have this cheating scandal that colors a full 2.5 seasons, you have to sort of, I still like my comparison.
Why don't you
about
phrase
the,
it this way? Phrase it this way. Ohio State beats Michigan on Saturday in the Big House 33-17 or 33-10. And it's one of those games where Ohio State controlled the game from start to finish. Could you imagine what we'd be talking about right now? I mean, think about it from the reverse. Like, could you imagine that? Now, the thing that I'm most interested in is, and we're going to get to an Ohio State question, I think, later on in the show, but Ohio State is kind of in a position right now where it has some soul searching to do again, right? I have a column running on The Athletic on Monday about Ryan Day, the way he called the game and why he could have a Michigan problem or does have a Michigan problem. But by and large, you can expect that Ohio State's probably going to win 10 or 11 games again next year, right? Like with the team that they have and how they recruit and who they're playing. I know that the new Pac-12 teams are going to be in there next year, so maybe it's going to be harder to get to 11. But there are a lot of question marks for Michigan moving forward. Like, is Harbaugh going to be your coach next year? Is the NCAA going to get involved and do anything? Like, all that stuff still exists. And we didn't talk about it this weekend because it didn't matter at the time. But, like, you better savor it now, too, because you don't know what's coming down the pike. And maybe Sharon Moore will just get hired. And what do you mean? Well, I'm saying, like,
going to take a step back.
Is Michigan going to take another 7 to 10 year step back because they
not
lose
7
their
to 10 years, but at least
year
a year or two?
Yeah, I mean,
Ohio State,
they're losing a very large crux of their team this year. We don't know who their coach is going to be next year. They haven't recruited in a way that makes it feel like they are untouchable. And the thing that they've done really well is a transfer portal. Who's going to want to transfer into a place that's in trouble? Like, that is like, go get it this year because it might be a tough few years coming down the pike. But in terms of what it means for this 3-year sliver, I think I was listening to a podcast and they said that there was only 3 or 4 instances of Ohio State losing 3 in a row in the entire history of the rivalry. Like, this is going to be a golden era of Michigan football, and it's going to be something that people talk about when they're 30 or 40 years down the road when they're talking about their earlier memories of this. I just don't know what happens in terms of sustainability. I didn't know the sustainability of the program before all this happened. And now with all this happening, like, I don't think that Harbaugh is going to be the coach next year. So we'll see how it goes. But certainly in terms of big regular season wins, I can't even come close to catching up to one that amounts to this.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Next.
Ari, Dave, this is Sad Husker Nate from New Mexico. I don't want to talk about the Huskers. They don't deserve it. What I'm here to talk about, Ari, is that you say that there's Group A and Group B, and Group A is Ohio State, and I just watched them lose to my best buddy's favorite team, those blue-collar, scrappy, hardcore Wolverines. And I just watched Alabama. I don't know what that was, and they are not a playoff team. Like, you guys can dance around it, but they are not a playoff team. And when you have that much talent, isn't that just a waste of talent? And that's all I really have to say is like, Ari, you're right. Stars matter. But aren't Alabama and Ohio State wasting more talent than teams like Iowa, who just beat I'm not even going to mention them. Like, isn't that more of an injustice to the sport to waste such good talent?
I think it's a really interesting point. The response that I would have to that is only one team can win a national title any given year. And I think that Alabama has warped our minds into thinking that it's easier than it is. And now Georgia's doing it.
Well, maybe.
And it's just, how do you waste talent when you win 11 games or 10 games? You know, like
let's talk about specifically Ohio State and Alabama, because that's what he brought up.
Also,
I don't think it's that complicated. What?
Alabama, if everybody is giving us crap, I don't know if you've noticed this about like them being in Group A and how we're overrating them and talking too much about them. Guess what?
We're
going to find out in 5 days. Like if they get their ass kicked by Georgia, then he's going. We know. If you think that Alabama is a fraud and they stink, then you have nothing to worry about. Their day's coming. Okay, go ahead.
Alabama is still in a lot of ways who we thought that they were at the start of the season. They still struggle to protect. They still don't have any hugely dynamic weapons, but Milroe has grown into an impact player. If we were playing him on NCAA 14, he'd have that little star blinking underneath him as he was carrying the ball. I have no doubt about that. And he was not that necessarily to start the season. He has grown into that. He is playing fantastic football. That has helped hide some of the issues, and they're still really, really good on defense, and they're still really talented. Ohio State is different in some ways because Ohio State, their defense has played really well. They have weapons, but if you're limited at quarterback, your ceiling is pretty low. And Kyle McCord is a 5-star guy that you'd like to grow. And just like Jalen Milroe, he's a first-year starter too. McCord has not shown a ton of growth, and Milroe has, and he helps cover up some of those issues. If you switched those quarterbacks, Ohio State would be like an unbeatable team right now. They would be untouchable if they had Jalen Milroe at quarterback, but they don't.
And what people have to realize,
you still got to cover this up.
These are the bad seasons for these teams. Like, these are not like true. The good seasons for them. So, yes, but like you want to talk about wasted talent? Get the perfect guy here.
I think we just talked about Texas A&M.
When I think about wasted talent, I think of like USC, Texas before this year, Texas A&M. I don't think of teams that win like 11, 10 games a year.
I think it is a damn shame that Caleb Williams' team lost 5 games this year.
Yeah, I think if USC would have just like went 10-2 and like won the Pac-12, I think that would have been kind of a disappointment for their fans because like it wouldn't have been like a playoff trip. Mm-hmm. But like they're not even doing that. Like they're 7-5 Las Vegas Bowl with Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and also too, when you think about wasted talent, the players that are going through these programs during these down years are also going to go to the NFL and make a lot of money, and went to those places that competed at a high level. And it's like, even if Alabama lost or loses to Georgia, I mean, they just made it to the SEC championship game on what we perceive to be a down year, and they might win a national championship in what is legitimately a down year. You want to talk about stars mattering? Flawed teams like Alabama still have a chance to win a national championship going into championship weekend when they came into the year not knowing who their quarterback was and can't block anybody like that, or couldn't at the beginning or pass pro.
And don't have a dynamic back.
And also, too, if I don't want to drag us into the pits of hell of a playoff discussion here, but next year when it's 12, this question will not exist anymore because all these teams, even in the bad ones, will be making the playoff and will go on runs that are going to disappoint people. It's like if Ohio State made the college football playoff as the 8th seed this year and got matched up with a team, who would they be matched up with? Like a Penn State-ish type team potentially in the first round. You don't think it's possible for teams that are disappointing and want to blast themselves into the sun could go win 3 or 4 games and win a national championship on their down years? Like, that is going to happen before Cinderella wins the championship. So that, to me, is kind of like the whole thing for next year, too. It's like you're not helping out any of the small teams. UCF might get a seat at the table and makes Dave's heart nice and warm. But all we're doing is giving all the 2-loss Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia teams, when they happen, a free pass to go try to win a championship, even when they didn't do enough. And those teams, Like 2015 Ohio State's the perfect example. They would have won the national title if they made the playoff that year. I firmly believe that, but they didn't make it because they lost. And losses mattered back then. They don't matter anymore.
Did you cry on Saturday once the game's ended? Like, this is the last Saturday that ever matters in college football?
Well, I am very torn, and I talked about this on Sunday. I thought that Saturday's day was the epitome of what college football is in a 14 field. And I will miss that. I'm going to miss the impending debates that we're going to have on the show. Can you imagine when we get to the end of the season and it's Saturday night and we're on the show talking about 1-loss Texas and 1-loss Oregon as the 4 seed going into the final, like how fun that's going to be. And then I get to the other half of me, which is like, that sucks.
Seeding matters, Ari. Hosting a game matters.
Yeah,
it will be a factor.
I'm never going to be on that with you. It's win or out. In or out is the only thing that matters. And I'm not saying that seeding doesn't matter, but yeah, I know. I mean, are you going to sit on the edge of your couch the way you were on the final drive of that Ohio State-Michigan game to figure out whether or not Tulane's a freaking 11 seed? Get out of here. It's not a thing. It's not.
I was told, Ari, that rivalry games matter more than anything. So it should.
Yeah. Is that a good segue?
Without all the other nonsense outside the lines, the
general fan doesn't care about Tulane's rivalry the same way that Tulane fans do. The general fan was watching the Ohio State-Michigan game because of how compelling it was, because the loser was going to be out. And it's an undisputable fact. It's not, and if you're going to act like it's going to get the blood pumping the way that an in or out loser dies mentality to see whether or not Tulane gets to play Bama or Georgia in the first round at home or whatever, I don't know. Whatever happens, it's just not going to match that. That said, if Texas or Oregon get left out of this playoff field as a 1-loss conference champion, that is disgusting, and I have no choice but to embrace a 12-team field next year. So I hope that doesn't happen.
Ari, walking contradiction, Wasserman.
I'm saying I'm torn. Can I be torn?
I know.
On the left side, it's like that train meme where you're like looking out onto the, one side's a brick wall and one side's a beautiful valley. Let's go to the next voicemail. I'm ready to light you up.
No.
Hey, this is John Skolsky in Aranjuez, Spain. I just listened to your Week 13 pick show, and 29 minutes and 5 seconds into that, Dave said that, and I'm quoting, that he's tired of angry Ohio State fans contacting him, telling him that he doesn't get how important the Ohio State-Michigan game is. And then he said, I'm quoting, I get it. And then he followed it up immediately by saying, Ohio State fans are focusing too much on the Michigan game and not enough on the fact that they came a field goal away from winning the national championship. And you don't get it. I would rather beat Michigan every year with a stick and go 8-4 than win a national championship. And when we did win the national championship in 2014, 2002, I celebrated my ass off. I did. But you know what I celebrated more? J.T. Barrett picking up 4th and 1 in double overtime and Curtis Samuel scoring a touchdown on the next play to beat Michigan. I put my fist through the dining room table, literally. Put my fist through the table, and I cut off the corner of that table with my fist hole, and I hung it on my wall in my office to remember that game. That's what you're not getting, Dave.
If you did a poll.
All right, can I ask a question? Just a quick question. In most stadiums around the country, indoor facilities, wherever they do it, do they hang banners for wins over rivals? I'm just asking.
Does Ohio State facilities in the country give you solid gold jewelry for doing it?
Do most stadiums have signage commemorating all the years that they beat their chief rival?
Ohio State's building has multiple areas where the Michigan game is immortalized. Yes.
Okay.
If you walk through Ohio State's football facility, they've got every year hanging up that they beat Michigan. They've got videos on replay of the biggest plays in the rivalry. They have their biggest accomplishments in that game, and recruits walk by it. Yes, they do.
Is it hung up in the stadium, though, Ari?
Oh, I don't know if it's hung up in the stadium. The only thing that's hung up in the stadium
is it less or more prominent than national championships?
No, what I was going to say, though, Dave, is I did a poll about this because I thought that was bull like 5 years ago when I was on the beat. People were saying they cared about beating Michigan more than winning a national championship. I think it was in like 2015. Mm-hmm. No. It was heading into one Michigan game where Ohio State would still get in the playoff, I think, if they lost. And I asked, would you rather lose to Michigan and make the playoff and win the national championship, or beat Michigan, make the playoff and lose in them. And like 50% of people said beat Michigan. So like I know that you don't think that's true.
It's such
I know.
brainworm mentality.
I don't think that you can fathom how much losing yesterday is going to eat at the people that root for Ohio State. Like that is, I bet you that feels
that many
worse for
people
them than
truly
winning the
believe-
national championship felt good.
All right, if that many people truly believe that they would rather go 8-4 and beat Michigan than lose to Michigan and win a national championship, that's so insane. Like that's
You're
just
never going to understand it.
That's just so ridiculous. I can't even wrap my head around.
If you ask
like,
an Ohio
the
State fan
inanity
right
of that.
now, would you have rather have gone 8-4 this year and beat Michigan, or lost to Michigan and make the playoff and win the national championship without getting a rematch, with the way that they feel right now and how much that game mattered? And like, also, we just got done talking about how that was the biggest win I can fathom in the history of my lifetime. You think that Ohio State fans wouldn't want to take that away from them? Like, I
All
don't.
This is like having a really nice house on the block, and you live right next to this other house that's not quite as good, still kind of sucks, but it's like okay, but like their pool's slightly bigger. So like that's the idea of like, well, we lost to them, but we won our national championship, everything's going great, but like they have this one thing on us. Like that's so insane. That's ridiculous.
That's a terrible analogy.
I always thought it was
It's
weird.
not a terrible analogy.
I always thought it was weird how like Ohio State was like the better program, but seemed like more obsessed with Michigan than like Michigan seemed with Ohio State.
I actually like. I haven't spent a lot of time around the Iron Bowl.
It's not like that in Alabama.
I don't know what it's
beat
like.
them,
Ohio
it's not
State
like
fans
Texas,
are
Texas A&M,
obsessed with the
Texas,
Michigan
Oklahoma.
game.
It's not like that.
There's a documentary on HBO that kind of explains, if you haven't seen it, it's from 15 years ago now. The Michigan game is bigger. That's why I think it's the best rivalry in sports, because the obsession of the people that I interacted with while on the beat was so hyper. Even when it wasn't fun and Ohio State was winning by 100 every year, like they still were like, I'm so tired of this. I once wrote a column that Ohio State's rival is now Clemson, when they were beating the crap out of Michigan every year and Clemson kept beating them and recruiting and into the championship. And I was like, their biggest issue right now is beating Clemson. And I think that the 2020 playoff game where they beat the crap out of them was cathartic, but I don't think you have any idea how hurt people are right now. And like trying to, I know national championships are king. And certainly if they would have won last year and beat Georgia and won the national championship, it would be like, yeah, we got it done. But like, that's how people would have felt, and I just don't understand with the entire Ryan Day discussion, how you can sit there in this rivalry and say, but they almost beat Georgia last year, and think that that is like good enough for them.
Think bigger, people. That's all I'm saying.
Do you ever expect like
Macro.
Ryan Day's teams to like rise to the moment though?
Maybe.
I don't think Ryan Day rises to the moment. Again, check my column on Monday. I think that Ryan Day coaches tight. I think he gets conservative. He forgets who he is. And that has a major impact on his team. I knew that Ohio State was going to lose that football game the second they wound that field goal down at halftime. I sounds maybe kind of stupid, but I was like, that is, you go into the locker room, that's what you're marinating with in the locker room. Your coach, Marvin Harrison just catches a 45-yard pass. You've got the best collection of receivers in the entire country, and you don't even try. And if you actually go back and look at the Ohio State game, Michigan's biggest pass play of the game came from a running back. Michigan's second biggest run came from a special package for the backup quarterback. Did Ohio State try to do anything in that game? Like, what did they try to do? When were they not on the ropes? They didn't even try. And it's like, I almost feel like going for it and failing to convert would have been better for the team than kicking a field goal that missed. So I don't know.
Ari, I have a question though, Ari. And you would know the answer to this. So you want to tell me that if Ryan Day went 8-4 3 straight years, but beat Michigan in all 3 of those years,
no, that wouldn't be good enough.
He would face less consternation from the fan base than he does now, where he's dominating everyone. But
Well, the
losing
thing
to
that you
Michigan.
don't understand is, and yes, the college football playoffs expansion might change this a little bit, but Ohio State fans view the season with 3 goals: to beat Michigan, to win the Big Ten, and then win the national championship. And if you have a Michigan problem, that stands directly in the way of doing any of those things. Most years. It didn't last year because it worked out for them. But this year, it's not going to work out for them. If you go 8-4 and beat Michigan and you just have like bad teams, then you can fix those bad games and do that. If you can't beat Michigan, you can't achieve what you want to achieve every year. Like Michigan is almost the prereq to achieving those goals. And Ryan Day is 0-9 in those goals in the last 3 years. And the reason why is because he can't beat Michigan. Now, I know they made the playoff, but they didn't beat Michigan and they didn't win the Big Ten. Like you were going on to like if you go into the Ohio State football building, there are lists of Big Ten. They care about the Big Ten championship because that signifies beating Michigan. Like you can't judge a coach who has a Michigan problem and say, well, they are pretty close while the Michigan problem still exists. Because if you have a Michigan problem, you have a program problem. And that's what I'm trying to explain.
Does the quality of Michigan just not matter, though?
Of course it does. But 3 years in a row with what they have on that sideline. Listen, if you've listened to this podcast,
Michigan's been the better team 2 out of those 3 years. And that doesn't have as much to do with Ohio State as it does about Michigan.
Since the first time Andy Staples brought me on,
Mm-hmm.
I have said Ohio State, from my perspective, is the most underachieving program in America when it comes to what they bring in and what they put out. Okay? That's a hard thing to say for a team that has won a lot of games as they have. But when you compare the recruits they bring in and the coaches that they've had and the players that they – I mean, you're watching C.J. Stroud on Sundays, and he went 0-2.
Mm-hmm.
They don't – there's something off, and I don't know what it is. And if you add the fact that their coach takes the ball out of Marvin Harrison's hands in a critical moment in the game and puts it onto a kicker whose career long is 47 yards and a 52-yard thing in the ice cold on the road the year after a 50-something yard field goal lost them the game in the semifinal, there is a fundamental issue in the brain chemistry of that coach. And Ohio State had a lot of teams stacked with Orlando Pace and Eddie George and all of these teams in the 90s that lost to inferior opponents because their head coach turtled up in that game. And I know that Michigan's been good. But you think that Ryan Day is not going to turtle up next year when they play because they're not as good? Now, Ohio State might win because they're better than them if that happens. But you know how many times John Cooper lost to teams with 3 and 4 losses during that time period with Heisman Trophy winners on his team and 19
But that's not what's happening to Ryan Day. Does Jim Harbaugh, I mean, not
but him becoming timid is happening to him. Are you watching the games?
It does. I don't disagree with you. But in some ways, is Urban Meyer's dominance over Michigan not slightly lessened because Michigan was garbage for a lot of those years? Does no one care about this? Am I the only person?
Well, no. The reason why that is the case is winning is paramount, but also Urban Meyer's teams went on to do very big things after the fact. And I'm not saying that Ryan Day has to go 7-0 or 9-1 like Jim Tressel did. You can't lose 3 in a row when you have a rookie quarterback in the NFL who's about to maybe win the Rookie of the Year and is in the MVP discussion. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't lose 3 in a row. You can go 2-2. If it turns into the 10-year war because Michigan has Bo and Ohio State has Woody again, then that's an understandable thing. Sometimes teams lose to good teams. I'm not saying they have to go 8.
That's what's happening to Ohio State right now.
They've lost 3 in a row for like the 3rd time in the rivalry's history.
Yeah, what if 2 years from now he's 2-3?
I don't understand how it's not landing for you. I don't like. Are you listening to anything I'm saying?
I get it, but
Antonio, go ahead. What were you?
Even yesterday, when I was watching the game, I was like, when Ohio State scored their first touchdown to make it 14-10, and then when they tied the game at 17-17, I was like, they could do more than Michigan. Like, Michigan's gonna have to kind of control this clock. Maybe JJ McCarthy's gonna have to make some throws. I was like, they can do stuff more easily than Michigan can. They should win this game, and they didn't.
I know. 3 years in a row. They had Marvin Harrison on last year's team too, remember? And a top 5 pick in the NFL draft playing quarterback.
Yeah.
And listen, Ohio State has spent the entire offseason reconstructing its roster to be tougher and to stop the run and to be able to exist in these types of games, and it's still lost. And you're telling me it's like no big deal because they almost beat Georgia last year? You're insane.
I didn't say it's
You're
no
insane.
big deal. I didn't say it's no big deal. My thought is, I think that it is very reasonable to believe two things at once: that Ryan Day coached not a great game on Saturday, and that
No, it wasn't that he didn't coach a great game. He literally shrunk in the moment.
Okay.
At every turn.
Okay. I think that
Which
happened.
we've seen before in the 90s.
Okay. I think that happened. And I also think that Ryan Day can take Ohio State to be all the things that Ohio State wants him to be. I think those things can both be true.
Yeah. I mean, if you think that my position is to fire him, that's not the case.
I know,
want you
but
to simply
that's
acknowledge.
I'm acknowledging that it's bad. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying, like, people got to chill out a little bit. You don't like when I say that, but it's just true.
Yeah. I mean, you're a college football reporter and you're telling the most heated rivalry in the sport when they lose to chill out. Like, do you see what's happening?
Everyone wants to blow everything up, Ari. You don't think that Ohio State should fire Ryan Day, but a lot of people do. And I'm just saying, be careful what you wish for.
The last thing I'm going to say is that Ohio State is the only program in America that hasn't had prolonged periods of being down. No, I think they've had one losing season in the last 40 years.
I think a lot of that is because there's not a lot of peers in the Big Ten, though, Ari. You look at Ohio State, it's them and Michigan, who has been down from time to time. And who else is challenging them? You look around the SEC, there's 9 programs that think they should be playing for national championships. You look in the Pac-12, UCLA's up sometimes. Oregon has come up. A lot of that is not because there's just some magic pixie dust that Ohio State has. Is that they have a ton of advantages in a league that does not have a lot of places that have elite aspirations.
Those still also exist. I know USC and Washington are coming.
I know.
But Ohio State is a Power 5 program in a very talent-rich state that is
I know,
but
you keep bringing up that they never have these down periods and that
they
that's
don't. You're trying to say be careful what you wish for to people like they're going to start losing 4 games a year. It doesn't happen.
I'm not saying that, but the league is changing. The league is changing. And you say they've never had these down periods, and I'm saying that that's possible, and it's more possible than they think.
Oh, so if they fire Ryan Day, and I'm playing devil's advocate here. I don't think that they should fire Ryan Day, but devil's advocate. You're telling me that you should be careful what you wish for if you're an Ohio State fan who wants Ryan Day fired because they might lose to Oregon like they did 2 years ago.
No, but that you might have a coach. You might have a coach that it is not reasonable to believe can do all 3 of the things that you want to do, which is beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and win the national championship. I think it's very reasonable to believe that Ryan Day can do all of those things, literally next year.
And I think it's very reasonably well to think that people are scared to shit that he can't. There's more than enough evidence the last 3 years.
It's reasonable to be scared, but the faction of people who are like, oh, this guy sucks, we gotta go hire John Gruden or whatever. Come on, guys.
When you take the $11 million a year that he's being paid, you understand you understand the grading rubric.
I'm not saying saying he's passing.
That's the grading rubric.
I'm just saying it's reasonable to look at what they've done the last 2 or 3 years and say
you
all
cannot
the things that you want to do.
The
this
grading
guy
rubric.
can do it.
You cannot.
You
just can't.
I'm not.
Okay. Do we have another one? Dave doesn't get it, everyone. He's still we tried. And if you think I'm an idiot, then that's fine too. Antonio, thank you for bearing with us.
Sorry for bringing some rationality to the conversation.
This is not a rational sport, Dave. Stop.
But what's wrong with bringing a little rationality to it, Ari? You're listen. I recognize that we cover a sport in which the postseason is chosen by 13 random people locking themselves in a room and choosing their 4 favorite teams. I get that that's what we're talking about. But there's nothing wrong with bringing a little rationality to the conversation. I know you hate that, but people have got to chill.
I'm just saying, you should know that if you want to have a rational conversation about the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, doing it 5 hours after the biggest edition of it since 2006, and people being heartbroken, on the podcast that we're catering to people, then you don't just say, hey, no big deal, they were close last year when they're about to drive their cars off of a cliff. It's just
if he was gonna listen, if Ryan Day was losing to 7-5 Michigan teams, to 8-4 Michigan teams, I would agree with you. He's losing playoff games to playoff caliber teams. I'm sorry if I don't think that's an
Antonio.
unforgivable sin.
Remember the judge Antonio episode that we did where you had
Judge Andy.
who's getting the judgment here from Antonio?
I'm siding with you, Ari.
Woohoo!
Because Ryan Day, okay, he's
Antonio's dead to me.
he's not beating Michigan, but he's not winning national titles either. Like it's not.
But he almost did. Literally last year.
He did. He failed for the same reason he failed yesterday.
Oh my!
Like, did he learn? Did he learn from that? Did that halftime?
I guess you have to ask him, Antonio. You'd have to ask him.
Did that end of half sequence suggest he learned from the Georgia game last year?
He coached scared yesterday. I'm sorry. It's true. That is a fact.
If you are interested in what I have to say about the Ohio State rivalry game, there is a 1,500-word column coming tomorrow about how I feel the way he coached that game. I think Ryan Day is a very nice guy. He's always been very gracious to me. He deserves what's happening here. When you get paid $11 million, he deserves the criticism, and he'd probably be the first person to tell you that.
Right,
that will be on the Athletic on Monday.
Ohio State fans need to chill out appear in that phrase, in that column.
You might actually think I need to chill out because, like, I laid it out.
You do need to chill out a little bit.
Yeah,
you're a more reasonable version of the Ohio State brain. That,
buddy, I lived in Columbus for 10 years covering this team with these people. You don't think I know how they feel?
I recognize how they
feel. My
feel.
entire job is to take the pulse of what people feel and write into it. That's what we do. Like, I understand this more than you do right now. And it's not because you're stupid. It's just because I've lived it.
Okay. I understand it, and I'm seeing it. I'm understanding it, and I'm saying, y'all got to chill out a little bit. He's still really good.
All right, let's get to the last one.
Hey, this is Cole from Houston, Texas fan, Texas grad. If Florida State wins out, I will urge all Texas fans not to complain about being left out of the playoff because the regular season matters. And we lost to Oklahoma when we shouldn't have, a team that we're better than. And if you go undefeated and win your conference in a major conference, you should be in. Do I think Texas is better than Florida State? Yes. I think they're better than Florida State with Jordan Travis, but they're definitely better than Florida State now. Texas is better than Oregon, but we can't prove that. Secondarily, I think the Big 12 is the fourth best of the Power 5 conferences, but maybe third. I think the Pac-12 midseason was great, but look at it now. There's two good teams, and the Big 12 is full of unbelievable scheming coaches, and it's a lot tougher than people think. That's all. Hook 'em. Bye.
It's starting.
Two good
teams right there.
Two good teams. Did they see?
Well, USC isn't one.
Did they see Arizona play this year?
Yeah, Arizona and Oregon.
The Arizona-Oregon game was awesome this year.
Here. Yeah.
Well, you're the key here, Antonio, because you cover the conference. It's a very good conference. It's a very deep and competitive conference. Mm-hmm. If Oregon wins, by the way, 9-point favorite Oregon.
9 points? I didn't see that today.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot. Okay. Dang,
wins and beats Washington and Vegas next week. And Texas beats Oklahoma State, no problem. And we're both sitting here at Georgia's in, Michigan's in, and Florida State's in. And there's one spot for Texas and Oregon. Who do you go with, and why is that the worst question anybody could ever ask anyone?
I think I'm going with Oregon just because they beat everybody on their schedule. Their lone loss was on the road. Like Texas was a neutral site.
Mm-hmm.
No, it was at Tuscaloosa.
No, they lost to Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Mm-hmm. So Texas was at a neutral site. Oregon lost to Washington on the road by 3 and a missed field goal. Then they would have beaten them again in the Pac-12 title game on a neutral site.
Mm-hmm.
So I think resume, I would go with Oregon.
It's a compelling argument.
Yeah, no, I think I would. Oh, God,
you're beating yourself here.
Texas is closer to Group A than Oregon.
I agree.
Yeah, but Oregon's been the better team this year, Ari. Ari, can you look me straight in the face and say that Texas has been a better football team for 12 weeks than Oregon has been?
I bet you the spread of that game would be less than a field goal if they played each other.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, on a neutral field.
It is the worst case scenario for this playoff because you have two very deserving teams. Because you also can make the case that, I mean, hell, it's one of the best wins in the country this year, going on the road in Tuscaloosa and winning by
It
double
is
digits.
really impressive.
And I think
and only
that
aged better by the day. I thought it might age not great, but it aged fantastic.
it aged pretty well. So I think you can make a compelling argument for both. And I think whoever loses that argument has been given a disservice. And it makes me sick to my stomach, to be honest. Like, I like debating it. I either hope that someone loses and this is cleaner, or all the 4 teams in the playoff are undefeated. I don't want one of these teams to get screwed because of, arguments. As compelling as Antonio's was, it's just not right. So, yeah. It's a sad day. It's a bad day. Okay, Antonio, this was always going to go long. I'm sorry, but we have to talk a minute about your Lincoln Riley Q&A. You got to sit in his office and you asked him really pointed questions. And again, I urge everybody who listens to the show, if you're not subscribed to The Athletic, and you even care 1% about Lincoln Riley and USC, this is a must read. But what was your main takeaway from sitting down with him, and how did it impact your viewpoint of the direction of this program?
I think he said what he needed to say in terms of owning the bad that happened. I think I'm still curious about what his actions are going to be and who he hires as a defensive coordinator and kind of what they do. I think he realizes this is a time to look at changing how they practice and some of the stuff they do. But people have asked me about Lincoln Riley and the defense changing, and fans have or readers have. I'm just like, the words don't matter to me. It's the actions. And I want to see what they do, what they look like next year and stuff like that. But for him to kind of own what he said, it was weird, just because during the season when we talked to him in scrums and press conferences, he'd be like, oh, the defense is fine, blah, 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 blah. Like, he's going really hard in defending the defense. Then you get him out of season for like 3 days after the season ends. He's like, obviously, we never found our footing defensively. It's just like, we were saying this to you at the end of the Colorado game when you guys get 41 points. Then he said the trained eye comment that got everybody pissed off. But I thought it was interesting, and I'm glad he sat down and talked about kind of all how the season went wrong and everything like that, and handling expectations and all that stuff, and his future. That's what I really wanted to ask him about, was his comments after the Utah game, where he said he's going to sign up to be here for a long time. So I had to ask him about Caleb going to the NFL, and if some team offered him, would he go coach him? And he said, hell no. So it was a pretty unequivocal denial that he'd go to the NFL. So I'm curious to see kind of where he goes from here, because I'm just curious. It was the most disappointing way for the season to go if you're a USC fan, but I think it was the most fascinating to just watch and observe the program and see where Lincoln Riley goes, because this is a pivot point. Is he going to learn from it, or is he going to kind of keep doing the same stuff he's been doing and keep coming short of what he wants to achieve?
Have you talked to transfers or outgoing players that have been in other programs? Because I think most people who watch the sport but aren't like their nose pressed up against the people that cover the sport, we don't see a lot of practice in most places. I covered Tennessee for 3 years under Jeremy Pruitt. I saw 1 day of 11-on-11 snaps, and for 2 years I didn't see a single 11-on-11 snap. Most places lock people out. He mentioned that he feels like they tackle as much as anybody, and I think that's a big problem. Do you think that's true?
I kind of wonder if it's like them tackling versus the scout team, as opposed to
not good on good.
Not good on good. Like, that's what I wonder if it is. If it's them just kind of beating up on the scout team, not going good on good. Like, in one of the cinematic recaps Oregon did, they were talking about like game planning for USC week, and they're like, yeah, we're going to hit our guys on Thursday for games like this. And it's like, does USC do that? Like, I'm not sure they do. We've seen one practice, but it was in the spring, so it's hard to tell kind of what they do. But obviously, it's not working because we've seen how their defense plays on the field.
It hasn't worked for quite a while in that program.
Antonio, what do you think, in your opinion, USC has to do?
Starts on with the defensive coordinator, getting that sorted out, getting a scheme and identity, and all that stuff figured out. They have a lot to evaluate on the recruiting trail because they're not getting enough elite guys, whether that's NIL or hiring better recruiters. I don't think the staff has as good of recruiters as Oregon does. I know the fans will complain about NIL and they'll get mad at me when I tweet like Oregon's just more intense recruiting wise than USC. They think it's just all NIL, and that plays a part in it. But I think there's nobody besides like Lincoln and maybe Dante Williams that I'm like, okay, this guy's an elite recruiter. So I think they have to get better there too. And I just think they need an identity. They lack one right now. It was just Caleb Williams create magic and let everything sort itself out. But there's no identity to this program, no calling card, no North Star that guides them to do what they do. And going into the Big Ten, that's something they need to establish. What'd you think, Ari?
Do I owe Andy $1,000?
Definitely.
Okay.
Have you seen the you've seen the schedule for next year?
I have seen the schedule. Yeah.
By the way, we were talking about this the other day. Antonio, are people still in on Malachi Nelson? Are you going to portal a QB? I mean, that can change things in a hurry.
He was injured. He was injured in the spring, and he tried to kind of gut through it, but he had like 3 turnovers in the spring game. So that was like the only glimpse everybody got of him. And then USC didn't separate enough in games to get any real glimpse of him during the season.
Yeah.
So I think people are kind of down on him for that spring game. And there hasn't been a ton of buzz coming out of practice. And I feel like, and so with some kids like that, though, like if you hear about them just like tearing it up,
it does come out.
It would come out. But we haven't heard much.
Well, who do you think is going to be their starting quarterback next year? Malachi Nelson or the field?
The field transfer, probably.
Yeah.
That's what I bet on.
I suggested this, and Ari was like, that's what I kind of said. I was like, you could roll the dice with Malachi, but you're also USC. You're also Lincoln Riley. If you're a quarterback in the portal and you pick up your phone and Lincoln Riley's calling, you're taking that call, regardless of all the other stuff.
I don't see Lincoln Riley going into a situation with like Ohio State or Alabama at the beginning of the year where they didn't know what they had at quarterback.
USC quarterback Riley Leonard.
Is he going to
heard worse ideas?
I don't know. His coach just left. He's really good.
This is true.
All right, guys, you go read the whole thing. Yeah. Quinn Ewers to USC. Joey Nichols said in the chat. That's funny.
What would you do if Arch transferred to USC, Ari?
Arch is Ohio State starting quarterback next year. Okay.
Can I just say, by the way, Arch looked pretty good. I liked what I saw from Arch.
He looked functional. Yeah.
It was
the fastest Manning of all time.
Yes. It was. When I've watched him, I haven't loved the arm strength. I think obviously accuracy. We'll see about processing. The athleticism was pretty good. I liked what I saw, and the arm had more pop than I've seen on like his high school film. So we'll see.
There's hope.
Yeah.
All right. An hour and 17 minutes. There's a lot to cover there. I had a really good time with both of you guys. If you are interested or not in USC, I strongly suggest that you go read Antonio's Q&A. I think that's probably one of the tentpole pieces that is going to, kind of hold the flag a little bit as we go into the offseason and watch USC try to find that identity. I'm going to Las Vegas this week to cover the Pac-12 championship game, and for multiple reasons, I'm upset that you're not going to be there, mostly because I'm going to have to pay Andy $1,000, but also because I just genuinely enjoy your company and I appreciate you coming on the show. For all you listeners here who have joined us live and have continued to do so every week, we certainly appreciate you. If you are listening to this in podcast form and want to be engaged in the live YouTube shows, the show can be found in your podcast description and vice versa. If you're a YouTuber and you want to listen to us in your car or while you're working out, be sure to subscribe, listen to, interact, comment, review the show in podcast feed. So for Antonio Morales and David Ubben, I'm Ari Wasserman. Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Until Saturday.